All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today in our AI panel. And specifically today, we're going to talk about the 3 must-knows when using AI. The goal of the session today is to give you some key takeaways, specifically these 3 areas that you need to take in consideration when implementing AI in your organization. So with me today, we have a distinguished panel of thought leaders in AI representing several sectors and industries, including healthcare, government, manufacturing, retail, and professional services. So I'm going to introduce them in a little bit. But before we begin, I just want to remind you that the Q&A section has been enabled. So feel free to post your questions there. Polls, chat, community sections are disabled, but you can write your questions at any time, and then we're gonna try to address them as we go or towards the end of the session. So with that said, let me have the panel introduce themselves. Priya, do you want to go first?
Thank you very much, Jose, and thanks for inviting us to join the conversation today. My name is Priya Gore. I work at Microsoft. I lead a team of data and artificial intelligence specialists focused on helping our manufacturing customers across the United States innovate with purpose and leverage AI and innovation to bring new experiences to customers and employees at scale. I also specialize in artificial intelligence consulting, working with our customers across industry, supporting their path to innovation, leveraging AI.
Awesome. Kirsten?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Kirsten Dalbo. I'm the Chief Data Officer at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I lead our data governance division, where we are implementing a data governance program to facilitate all of the data questions the data needs across the commission. We're building out an analytics platform to facilitate those needs, take advantage of the scalability, elasticity, the compute power of the cloud, because our mission is economically efficient, safe, reliable, and secure energy for consumers. So that means there's a lot of data coming in across the energy sector, and we need to be able to find potentially fraudulent actors. We need to make sure that we're ensuring the reliability of the grid. So we need to make sure that we have well managed, well understood data to do all of that kind of stuff. Previously, I was at the Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General for 2.5 years as their Director of Data Operations. Again, a really interesting mission across kind of that waste, fraud, and abuse space within healthcare. And before that, I was at the Department of Homeland Security for, I think, about 9 years. When I left there, I was their Chief Data Architect, and I led the build out of what was called the DHS Management Cube, which was our large data platform for all of the mission support data across the department.
Awesome. Jason?
Thank you, Jose, for having me here today. Jason Bush, Chief Data Officer at Avalon Healthcare Solutions. We are a lab benefit management company that specializes in ensuring labs are appropriately delivered to the patients and that the payers are paying for the right stuff and getting the right information back from their providers. I'm charged as the Chief Data Officer with our foray into analytics, which includes AI, machine learning, and other activities. So we're looking at incorporating laboratory values into some improved decision-making throughout healthcare.
Awesome. Joe?
Yes, good morning. My name is Joe Rogers. I am the CEO and founder of WorkDone. It's an honor to be part of this panel. WorkDone is a corporate memory platform that basically monitors work groups performing specific tasks, discerns the best practices across those members, and retains that knowledge. So it doesn't walk out the door when someone retires or changes jobs. And with that sort of corporate memory retained, we can use it to elevate other human resources to a higher level of performance, or for generating automation efficiencies. And it actually becomes a sort of an evergreen institutional knowledge memory bank, if you will. I basically, more like 4 years ago, was learning about machine learning, and I realized how I could automate myself as a consultant. And that was the genesis of work done.
Excellent. Will?
Hey everyone, my name is William Kinsman. I kind of got my AI career started doing language processing at Wall Street and in the NSA. Ultimately, I met somebody who pulled me into healthcare and got addicted to the healthcare applications of AI. And have since been in that for about 5 years, working at Inovalon, one of the largest aggregators of health data in the country. And since then, broke off and started my own company called DataLinks, where I'm CEO, and we do custom healthcare AI solutions. But I'm also affiliated with a few other startups such as Lobby, which is for practitioners, and also Tenosol, which is a government-oriented healthcare company as well.
Excellent. And my name is Jose Chinchilla. I'm the Data Analytics Director here at AgileThought, and I'll be facilitating the panel today. So with that, we're going to get started. So as I mentioned, there's the three main takeaways from today would be related to how to implement AI. What are the things that you should be looking into? What is the strategy that you should implement for an enterprise AI implementation? And where do you start? So with that said, let's get started. And let's level set the conversation here and just maybe define what AI is, what AI is not, and how does it differ from machine learning, data mining, some other techniques and approach to data. Priya, can you start us with that conversation?
I'd be happy to give it a try. Let me say this much. We know that AI means a lot of things to a lot of people. One of the things that I would encourage the attendees of the session today, our guests, to do while we're talking amongst the panel is use the chat. I'd love to make this interactive and ask you, what does AI mean to you, right? It goes by a lot of different names, as Jose mentioned: expert systems, data mining, predictive analytics, machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, the list goes on. So share your thoughts in the chat if you would. But fundamentally, artificial intelligence, in my view, is the capability of a machine to perceive, to learn, to reason, to extend the abilities of people and organizations. Think of it as a set of tools and approaches designed to augment our own human capability. And with that, I would say that intuition, self-awareness, the human unique ability to be curious is what really makes us human, and what really, in my mind, distinguishes artificial intelligence from human intelligence. So we'll start with
Awesome.
that.
Excellent. Anybody else wants to chime in and give your own definition, interpretation of AI? And
if I think about AI, at its basic, there's an automation element here. Generally, we're trying to make something more efficient. So at its basic, how can we automate processes to make them more efficient? That's, I presume, kind of how a lot of this got started. Particularly given my government background, that's probably a huge area where we think about AI really is, where can we improve efficiency? Across the federal government, massive mission, so many different agencies looking at different things. We're trying to ensure the safety, the public health, the public safety, all of that kind of stuff of our citizens. So making sure that all those processes are as efficient as possible. So, there's kind of that attended automation space where we're trying to look for ways to just improve our ability to get benefits administration out to our citizens, or how we can just improve basic processes where, in the government, we do a lot of stuff with contracts. Can we automate the contracts process? And then as we're delivering mission and we're doing things like law enforcement or looking for fraud, how can we then look for sort of that outlier, and what are those criteria? So there's a lot of automation now. Of course, as Priya talks about that AI, where it gets into sort of that intuition space and we get into that unattended automation, that's where things start getting more complicated, because what does that really mean? How do you sort of manage or control that? How does that not get too black box? So that we know what's happening within it. But to me, it's all just scales of automation.
absolutely.
And this is Will again. I'll jump in. One of the things I realize, like, every time somebody talks about AI, it's like they do always say like AI and ML, and I think people kind of like get a little confused sometimes. And I think like I'd say broadly, they generally mean the same thing. One is a subcategory. ML is a subcategory of AI. But I think it's totally okay to just say one or the other. And I like the idea of artificial intelligence, the phrase itself, because I think like when you think about early technology, like the Star Trek communicator was kind of a big inspiration for the cell phone that we have today. And I like this kind of like word that is like kind of out there and like really like science fiction-y that I think inspires a lot of people to get excited about it. So, yeah.
So the question is, when are we getting the beam me up Scotty technology, right?
I mean, one could even argue that, I mean, when you're doing your business case justifications, AI does sell better than automation or process improvement. So, go big or go home, right?
Exactly.
I think it's important, this is Joe, I think it's important to distinguish between general AI and narrow AI. And what's prevalent or more prevalent nowadays is narrow or artificial intelligence. And but people sort of extrapolate out into this, sort of like Star Trek, where you walk into the elevator and you just say where you're going and it takes you there. That's kind of a narrow use case. So that could be done. But, the more general, it's getting there, like Google Assistant and Alexa. It's getting there, but it's still science fiction.
And taking that to a step further, right? Imagine just walking to an elevator, not even have to say where you were going. It knows where you're going because it knows your patterns, right? What floor you typically go to, what time you take your lunch break, So yeah, that's an interesting use case that you just mentioned.
Yeah, but those learning algorithms that predict can have unintended consequences.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. And also, Kirsten brought it up. There's a lot of ethics and considerations around AI. We're gonna talk about that. So yeah, definitely. Let's touch base on that. Jason, what's your take?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same thing as Will. I see it as a continuum between what I think Joe was calling broad AI and versus narrow AI versus more analytics and focused. And some of it depends upon the targeting of what you want to get accomplished as to what tools you use. And some of those tools are very sophisticated. Some of those tools, you could say first year undergraduate engineering student probably learns the basics of. So it really varies on a broad spectrum. And I do agree, I think machine learning is a subset, a branch within what I would consider artificial intelligence.
Excellent. So yeah, just to sum it up and kind of put it in a cloud, a word cloud, right? So I heard human intelligence, human behavior, optimizations, and essentially, what's possible, right? Anything that is possible out there to automate and improve. So excellent. All right. So now talking about strategy, right? So and also talking about what does AI bring to the table? What's there right now that organizations can take advantage of? Who are the big players in that space, or what are the practical implementations of AI? So Priya, let's get started. As you're in your strategic position at Microsoft, can you give us some examples of some of the practical applications of AI that you see, with the customers, and where is the innovation happening? What are the things that are actually being implemented right now?
Sure. So let me speak first to maybe some examples in manufacturing specifically, just by way of example. And keep in mind that many of the things we're going to talk about that may be industry specific, many of the approaches and the patterns within the approach are transferable to other industries. So what we look for first and foremost from an AI pursuit perspective with customers is, do we have enough data? And so, generally speaking, that's sort of a prerequisite and criteria. If you think about it, an AI system without a really strong data set or data sets may not be so smart at the end of the day. It's only as smart as the intelligence pumping through it, right? The other thing in manufacturing that we see is a really strong pairing between artificial intelligence and the IoT, sort of the edge capability of what's available at the edge. How can we get real-time or near real-time data, sensor data off of machinery, off of equipment? And that really plays into, I think, what the panelists, my peers were saying too, is like, let's make this purposeful. And so we're seeing a lot of that. And we're trying to be really intentional with our customers. And to Joe's point, like, let's narrowly scope something. Let's think big, but let's start small and think about baseline. Where are you at today? How do you do this process today? And what's the workflow look like? And then how do we maybe leverage the capability of the technology and innovation? Because remember, AI is not new. It's been around for a very long time. But what is sort of has matured over the years is the ability to take AI to scale and democratize it. And we'll talk more about that later. But back to manufacturing, we're seeing a lot of really cool things. For example, we can basically look at an entire plant floor with a customer, and we can really go through and almost do like a design thinking session where we talk about, okay, tell me about the ways where you've got people, highly skilled and highly paid people, doing repetitive kind of tasks that we might be able to automate. And we might be able to leverage the technology and innovation that's out there to up-level the time they spend doing XYZ tasks, and also bring you more accuracy and better quality output off the shop floor. One other quick use case, computer vision is extremely prevalent in manufacturing and in healthcare and in many industries. And with that, we're seeing incredible innovation and maturity with our ability to look at and train models using images and object detection and all these different things, and set parameters on what's sort of acceptable and then what's sort of considered an anomaly or a concern, and training models leveraging the advancements in computer vision. And last, something that's really exciting that we're seeing more of is back to the beginning. When you don't have really strong data sets, where can we potentially leverage synthetic data sets to help us enhance our model and really start to try things that maybe we couldn't try right away? So that at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is help customers innovate at a rapid pace. With COVID-19 hitting our globe, many customers are having to think very differently about how they engage employees, how they enable their customers, and looking for new paths to revenue. So these are all things that I think, whether we recognize it or not, artificial intelligence will have a huge impact on the future of many companies around the world.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And Kristen, what do you see in government? What's happening right now with the AI, or some of the discussions around how can AI, and some of these other technologies help our government?
I mean, there are huge opportunities. In some ways, our problem is that there are too many opportunities, and Priya makes a really important point that finding that narrow use case is really important, because if we try to go too big at the beginning, we could create huge risk for ourselves, and that's not where we want to be. So finding the sort of the best bang for our buck is really the challenge. I mean, even just within the energy space, I mean, FERC is the smallest government agency that I've worked for, and still, I mean, we're regulating the energy industry. So there's a lot of potential areas that we could look at. I mean, a big one, one of our big missions really is to prevent sort of future Enron type events, so just really getting into energy market data and finding those outliers and potential fraudulent behavior when you're looking at 15-minute and even 5-minute increment trading information, and how you manage the volume, and how you've managed the governance around that to ensure that we are appropriately cataloging the metadata around this data, and we're tracking the volume consistently. And I mean, there's huge opportunity. I guess in some ways that's the government's biggest challenge, is just to even manage the potential number of use cases. I mean, so often when I do talk to industry about the opportunity, one of the first questions I get asked is, well, what's your use case? And it's almost a stopping point. What do you mean, what's my use case? I have easily 1,000 use cases at any given point. My problem is how I pick the one that provides the most value. Or I know when I was at HHS-IG, that's a $1.3 trillion oversight responsibility. And you're trying to find that needle in the haystack, the fraudulent actor. And so you only have so much staff and so much resources. So you want, and presuming every investigation is generally about the same level of effort to take on. You want to find the one that has the best bang for the buck. So finding that is sometimes more the challenge, but it is important to find that kind of narrow use case so that you don't open yourself up to unnecessary risk.
Oh, thank you for that. That's very insightful, Kirsten. Will and Jason, in your healthcare background, what's the innovation? What are the practical implementations of AI in that space?
I'll start off. The first thing that comes to mind to answer that question is anything around, obviously in the payer space. I think the payer space is probably the first place where AI is already actually being heavily implemented. And part of the reason is to play to what Kristen said, a lot of the highest ROI use cases are in that sector. You have a high volume of data going through these companies, and you also have companies that are very tightly trying to compete with each other. Where when they put money into these solutions, it gives them the edge that they need and is justified and can be deployed at a large scale. So anything around claims or medical records is really big. In the past, obviously the challenge has been data availability, but those are things that these companies are working around now. And if a good enough solution comes along, and it can even be built without that data availability, then these companies are very interested, and the walls do fall when a good enough solution comes along. But regarding like applications of AI in a business situation, I always tell people there are 3 scenarios when you are typically have a solution that might be good. One is when you're trying to rank data. So you think of like Google queries or like Netflix suggesting which is the best new TV series for you to watch. These are text message suggestions. These are all ranking operations. The next is complex data. So when you have very, very bizarre data that usually you need people to analyze all the time. Things like text data and image data, high number of variables. This is number 2. And number 3 would be probability situations where, for example, pricing the probability that an option will be in the money at expiration, or probability that Alexa has more than 90% confidence that it understands what you're saying. Otherwise, it will ask you to say it again. So if you have a ranking operation, complex data problem, or probability situation, these are all very good candidates for what your company might want to apply AI to. So.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I concur with Will. I think the payer space has a lot of opportunity in it, both in the fraud, waste, and abuse detection, which Kirsten mentioned. There's a lot of that in healthcare. Payers are very interested in that, not just the government, but the payers themselves. And identifying those relationships or those patterns that actually indicate it, so you know where to focus your limited resources, is going to be a value, and they're seeing some beginnings of that. Claims adjudication, big part of it. There's a lot of process and workflow that goes through claims adjudication. So there's a lot of opportunities. It's a pattern recognition activity. On the clinical side, when you think about the practitioners, there's a variety of fronts on that I think people are dabbling into, and there's a lot of effort and a lot of financial investment from the venture funds to go into, which relates to how do you identify things better, or can you do it better? So there's a lot of emphasis out there right now to show that the imaging of slides, the reading of a slides to determine whether a person has cancer or not, can be automated. And we'll talk about a little bit more on that on ethics in a little while, but that can be automated. So then it's, what is the purpose of that? So to some degree, if you think about a physician or a nurse in the facility, they're faced with information and overload and decision fatigue. And I think that's a perfect spot for AI to really go in and help alleviate and take some of those early simple decisions off the table, or those certain pathways that are very quick and need to be made off the table, so the physician and the nurse can focus on what they need to do. You're seeing a lot of it in the admissions process as well, and the discharge process, to try to predict, will this person come back within a certain period of time, because that's costly. How do I get them into faster? How do I get them into the hospital faster and put in the right spot faster? Do I need to move them out of the ICU? So you're starting to see a lot of those things within the AI realm, building tools and services and products to address a variety on the clinical front, as well as the administrative front on the payers.
Just to add to that briefly, one of my startups is doing exactly what you described. Lobby, we do like the goal is, and it's nice because you're making a non-clinical, it's not a high-risk decision-making process. Just doing everything you can to optimize all the factors that will get a patient to actually show up to their appointment, because no-shows are extremely high cost on even just the small practitioner side, and it's something that's easily approachable with AI solutions. So definitely cool when you called out there.
Excellent. And Joe, in your current business venture, how do you see AI transforming the way businesses do their business?
Yeah, sure. It's well, I can follow on from the last topic. It's in general, we're taking our approach at Work Done is sort of seamless and hands-free capture of this data. It's sort of like IoT for the desktop, and so one of the benefits of that is, again, our monitor is in the background. There's no UI, and we're actually fine-tuning the granularity of the data that's coming in. So we get to control it on the front end, which is great because we can tune it up, turn it up if we need more detail, and we also capture the outcomes on the back end. We kind of assume 100%, and then if we hear otherwise, maybe there's a problem that needs resolution, someone's calling into the customer service rep, we actually capture that and we capture the steps taken to resolve it. So as we learn, we populate the customer's corporate memory. If we're learning from, say, someone who isn't maybe very good at what they do, we're not necessarily learning from that person, or we de-weight the learning from that individual, and we're learning over a group. So taken sort of from a macro perspective, it's optimization, it's automation, it's sort of learning. A great example, we had a conversation recently with a large healthcare company. In this case, it was HR, which is more horizontal, but he saw a number of opportunities within his HR department, and they're 22 billion annually. But more on the clinical side, like pre-authorizations, that particular role where they're usually hiring people, younger people straight out of school, and there's high turnover. So, and there's these ICD codes, there's a lot of them, and you got to do it right. And so, if we can actually learn how to, it's multifaceted, because there might be an OCR component, and if you ever tried to read a doctor's handwriting, you know how difficult that is. But
the chicken scratch.
yeah, it's crazy. And in the medical billing side, and as Jason mentioned, like with radiology, it's been in the news a lot. I mean, it's unfortunate because it's a larger topic about future of work and what these poor radiology doctors are going to do when their job goes away because AI does it better. But it's kind of all part of the whole thing. We have to address it all together. That was a wide-ranging answer to your question, Jose.
Perfect answer. Thank you very much for that.
Sure.
But yeah, so that's a good segue into the next key takeaway about AI. So knowing where the current innovations, the current practical implementations of AI is, how do you suggest, how do you recommend, or what advice can you give to a business leader who wants to implement AI in their organization to be able to reach a particular goal? That could be a business goal or simply your mission of your organization. So open it up to the panel. What would be that strategy? And maybe Priya, you can lead us into that conversation.
Sure, I'll give you three quick things that come top of mind for me right away. First of all, I'd say, we kind of said this before, think big, be really aspirational in your thinking as a business, but start small. If you haven't adopted sort of an agile approach to application development and model development, then I would also recommend, you really think about that. It could be a really great value to your business beyond even implementing AI and infusing AI into existing workflows and next generation services you want to bring to market. The second thing I would say is, remember, at the end of the day, while AI, and Will hit on this a minute ago, it's a shiny object kind of thing. It's super interesting to a lot of people. The C-suite's really excited about it. It can feel really heavy and complicated, but if you break it down, as a business leader, you want to, think as an executive team about what questions do we want to ask of our data. If you kind of simplify it to that, you can very quickly get to a narrow use case that could very easily get you to an extreme path to return on investment for the effort there. And then the last thing I would say is, there is an element of preparing your company and the culture of your organization to accept AI. Joe brought up a really good point a minute ago about sort of the perception of job displacements and kind of the future of work. That is a real thing, but with it comes a future opportunity for companies to evolve, to create new roles, to really excite young folks that are coming into the workforce, to engage in different ways of learning and different topics that they could learn about, to be extremely relevant for next generation kind of all kinds of work. And so I think that we as business leaders have to also be thinking about sort of helping our existing employee base be AI culture ready. And we can talk more about that later at another time.
Excellent. Someone else wants to chime in on that?
Yeah, I guess I'll speak to this, and I guess my background is kind of in that data architecture space. I have a lot of passion around data architecture, so I'd approach it in thinking about making sure you know your data architectures, and good AI is predicated on having a strong data architecture and strong data governance. I mean, this means that you know what data you have, it's well inventoried, it's well understood, it's commonly understood. You might have a really well managed data set, and then when you try to join it to another data set, you realize that there are gaps that you didn't even realize because your business understands the concepts within your data differently. So if you have an auditing database managed by one group and an auditing database managed by another group, they might use the same term and mean entirely different things, which will create problems in your AI. So make sure that you know you have a strong data architecture, you govern it well. You really cannot shortcut these things. I think I even had a CIO once ask me if you can actually just automate governance, and really no, you can't. You do need to have that human intervention, that human discussion to make sure that we all understand. I mean, I know Jose knows this from working with me that we use a lot of cake analogies with my team, because you cannot bake a cake if you don't know what ingredients you have or how they can be used. So yes, think big about the opportunity, but make sure you know what ingredients you actually have available to you. You're going to bake omelets, but you have no eggs, that's going to be a problem. So that also goes to the, know what problem you're trying to solve, have a clear, well-defined, narrow use case so that you can really test the art of the possible and figure out where your gaps are and the weaknesses in your architecture before you things start crawling too big for you to control. So, don't do AI for the sake of AI, make sure that you have that clearly defined use case. And then I guess I would close out to say, as passionate as I am about data governance, think about your AI governance framework. So can you map that AI governance framework to your delivery pipelines to make it as seamless as possible? Make sure you have the right mechanisms built in such that as you're doing your code commit and you're progressing dev test prod, you've integrated through that process the right checkpoints to ask those questions around data ethics and risk analysis, so that you don't inadvertently get a product into production that will create problems for you later. So I'll stop there.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Anybody else wants to?
Yeah, I'll add to that. I like the themes that have come out so far. I completely agree. If you're not new to AI, think big, but start small, get early wins on the process. Having the data, knowing what the data is incredibly important. If you don't have the data, then there's nothing for the tools to actually start working on. The other part I would add to it is, and I think Priya alluded to this, is there needs to be some willingness to adopt the output of the process. So you're going to have a tool, you're going to have something that's going to probably ease workload, decrease workload, possibly even replace the work that certain individuals are doing, which is not a bad thing. right? As I tell my team all the time, I'd much rather have you working your brain muscle than your finger muscles on the keyboard or elsewhere. So it's better to more value to use the brain muscle. So that's one of the methodologies you have to think through is how do you convey that to the employees that might fear risk of displacement? Because it is a lot of improvement, efficiency. In some cases, just it's better than what humans can do because of we get distracted for a variety of reasons we don't need to go into today.
Excellent. Will or Joe, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, getting people who are like affected by these things also involved, I think, is a really fun part. I mean, a lot of the ideas I've had in AI have almost entirely been by people who I work with who have no background in AI, and it's really fun to get them involved in the creativity process, and like getting them closer to like AI and like people think it's complicated all the time, and it's like I think they get intimidated by it, but anybody I feel like can at least understand the general ideas and become less scared like about like losing their jobs, for example, or something if you kind of like introduce them and pull them in and like kind of break down those barriers. It has had massive implications on a lot of projects that I've worked on to really have people who want to be involved or people who might be scared to be more involved.
Awesome.
Yeah, just real quick, there's sort of a benefit to being sort of a babe in the woods. Like if as technologists, or it's sometimes it's a forest for the trees. If we're really into what we're doing, then it's hard to break out of that mindset or see things differently. So if you're someone who has no background at all, I mean, I know a number of people here in LA, they're more on the creative side, and they're constantly, I shouldn't say constantly, but I frequently hear ideas that just blow my mind, and they have no idea about how technology works. I'm like, oh my God, that's a great idea. So it's good it's almost a balance, you want to have that sort of creative or artistic input, and they might not have no idea what they're saying, but then it's when you start drilling down into it, it's quite valuable. It's one of my favorite aspects of this.
Excellent. So that's some good conversations and maybe a good point of discussion around the maturity of AI and does it make sense to democratize AI? Is it AI ready for the masses, or is it still in a maturity period where it's only the experts, only the data scientists can do AI, can work with AI? What are your thoughts on democratizing AI and bringing AI to the masses?
I mean, anything's possible, but I will come back to that concept of having the good AI governance framework. I mean, absolutely democratize the data, democratize AI, make it more accessible, but you still want to have the right controls in place before you productionalize something. I mean, you don't necessarily want to put anything in production, but you do want to democratize that innovative process. Let people try things. I mean, I know as a CDO, people ask me if I'm going to take all their data. No, absolutely not. I do not want all of your data. You guys have the subject matter experts. I need your partnership. I want to democratize this to get it into your fingers faster. But I do have some amount of, I want to ensure some consistency in methodology to make sure that we are confident that what we are putting out and making available is trusted, is authoritative, is going to come to the right conclusion. If you're thinking about like waste, fraud, and abuse areas where there's potentially investigations involved, someone could go to jail, healthcare, someone could die. We absolutely want to have those right controls in place to think about it. But we need the crowdsourcing, that innovation that comes from the masses, and then we want to have a good AI governance framework in place. So we're asking the right questions at the right point in time, so that we're thinking about the ethics, we're thinking about the risk assessment. So I mean, I think there's potential, but we want to have that good framework in place.
Awesome.
I'll add to that. I think that when I think about democratization of AI, a couple things come to mind. First of all, many software companies, so if you're looking at off-the-shelf SaaS solution, for example, many of those systems already have AI directly infused as part of that offering. And so I think that one thing that people need to recognize is when you're just generally using applications, you are leveraging AI innately by using those apps. And so, no, you don't need to be a data scientist or anything like that to engage AI in your business. If we take it a little bit further, there's also on the spectrum of AI, there are many, many pre-trained models now that are out there that you can leverage via simple APIs. So for example, whether it's around decision capability or language or speech or vision, there are many, many pre-trained algorithms out there, services that you can easily engage as a developer, for example, into existing application experiences, or maybe you're refactoring an application and you want to bring AI into it. You don't have to be a data scientist. You can literally grab these APIs and you can leverage them today, and they're very well-tested, reliable, come out of research in a lot of places, and we're democratizing AI with that. And then again, just to round out with what Kirsten was saying, no matter what it is, whether you're leveraging an API or you're going full in on Python and you're leveraging the tools that data scientists would leverage to do this, it does need to come with an effective responsibility. So question yourselves on how, no matter how we engage AI, are we doing so responsibly? And I think that that's a whole nother conversation, and one that you should really debate internally, because it is largely ungoverned and largely not addressed by any policies. So we have to make sure we take that on ourselves to do so responsibly.
I feel, democratization is great, but it really needs guardrails, because the data that's out there is, while it may be real data, it's frequently biased data, and when that's what you're building your model around, it's going to come up with biased results. And there's no shortage of news about that, where AI is adjudicating court cases and sending people to jail, or law enforcement, if it's it identifies people of color as issues, or it can't tell the difference. There's all kinds of examples like that. So we need to somehow before releasing it to the masses, I don't know how to do this. There needs to be some way to check that it's not dangerous.
So picking up on that thought, which really great conversation topic, is how do you ensure that transparency, that trust, that diversity in your AI implementations? What are your thoughts on making sure it's not that black box, that no one knows what it's doing and why it's taking this decision, or a particular decision against a specific attributes of population, for example? What are your thoughts on how to ensure that transparency, that trust in an AI implementation?
I can take this one first. This is Will. I think it depends on the application. There are a lot of black box, high confidence algorithms out there that exist. Google image search, for example, where there's no explanatory kind of aspect that's needed, because the use is fulfilled. It's very efficient at what it needs to do. But I would say for any time where there's concern for any bias at all, and I guess really AI models you could say that they're all technically biased, because they are making their decisions all based on bias. But one thing I've done, especially in the medical field, is you pull doctors into the room, you do the extra work to show them the transparency they need, and if that means not working with a deep learning model to show the transparency with a little bit of loss of performance, then that's what you have to do. So making sure that transparency is there when it's needed is an absolute must, especially when you're trying to get everybody on board with a decision, and make sure that no decisions are made for the wrong reasons, and that's okay. And we're getting better at that too. I think the transparency tools. There's an X Prize, I think, out for deep learning transparency. but we will see the evolution of transparency tools with specifically deep learning models really improve over the next few years.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the domain is really important to think about in this. I mean, if the AI model is going to impact a human life, someone might go to prison, someone might die. I mean, that's you really need to make sure that you have a well-managed model. It's not too black box. But I mean, if Netflix incorrectly predicts my favorite movie, I mean, no harm done. It's okay. So knowing your, I mean, knowing your domain, aligning that sort of ethical framework and black box stuff to the domain, I think is really important to think about. I mean, I'm a big fan of those like fashion Stitch Fix or Wannable or those others. Like, I love that it's data driven. I'm a data person, but like no harm done if they incorrectly predict my favorite outfit. But you know, in healthcare, if there's incorrect predictions that could impact human life, or in law enforcement, there's incorrect predictions that now create bias and we're sending the incorrect people to jail or enforcing something incorrectly. I mean, we really need to be thoughtful about that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would agree. Healthcare research went through that in the 60s, I believe, when they instituted institutional review boards, which were bodies specifically set up to govern clinical trials that involved human subjects. I think you could see an extenuation of that kind of thinking to AI where humans are involved, because much like Kirsten said, I would love to have an algorithm built by somebody anywhere in the country to predict how much water I should put on my lawn to make it the most green while minimizing my cost. That'd be kind of cool. So I think the democratization of AI is going to enable people to do those cool little apps that'll optimize your pool conditions or your green grass or your hydroponic garden or your vegetable garden, you know, planted one. They're going to be able to do that. And that's all well and good because it doesn't impact anybody. But when you get to the where people are involved and the false negative risk is really high, or the false positive risk is really high, or the consequences are really high, then you've got to have some sort of process for it to go through. And healthcare's had that with institutional review boards. I know that the automotive industry has done a lot with failure modes and effects analysis and making sure that the faults actually are sustainable, that they're not going to result in fatalities. So I think there's some things out there that could be borrowed from other industries to help AI get that as to what is the impact, how we minimize the downside. And I thought Will had a great point. You may need to back off on the type of model you're going to be using or the type of approach you're using within AI so that the visibility and transparency is there for the people on the other side who are going to be experiencing the output of it to make sure they're comfortable with it.
Yeah, and I would add that, you know, this all may sound to those of you listening today like it's a big task, right? But the good thing is, you know, model explainability and transparency. There are tools and frameworks out there for data scientists, developers, data architects, for people to leverage to really hold us all responsible for the AI that we're developing. And so I would just encourage everyone to, stay really curious about model explainability, make it a policy that if you're going to implement even something that's non-harmful, like Kirsten, you were talking about, just build that muscle, get that into your regular data science and AI, bringing AI to life in your organization practice, because I guarantee you someone will ask you, no matter what it is, whether it's a really high risk or high reward scenario or something pretty basic, but still interesting, and people are going to be curious. So being able to explain your models and helping demystify and really avoid that black box is really going to be, in my mind, a significant best practice as we see AI become more and more of not even a nice to have, but a need to have for every company to innovate and be relevant going forward.
Awesome. Those are really great observations and comments. So now in the last 5 or 10 minutes of our panel, I just wanted to for our attendees to walk away with some practical advice. How can they start implementing AI? Is AI a good fit? Perhaps. How do you evaluate what are the value that AI can bring to a particular goal or mission? What are the skill sets required? Is this something that they would need to partner perhaps with some other organization, some other company? Is that something that can be homegrown? What is your advice on how can organizations start leveraging AI, and what are the practical steps to do that? I'll open up to the anybody. Maybe.
At Work Done Here, we kind of describe our approach as an easy on ramp, because we're not really asking. We're kind of invisible. We suggest to our clients that they inform the users, their staff, hey, we're putting this piece of software on your desktop. It's going to be in the background watching what you do. And there's a privacy conversation around that, and we want to give them the opportunity to ask questions, and depending it really comes down to the culture and how they want to handle it. But we say, look, we can segregate so that if you need to do something personal, we can use this browser. We'll redact that application. We won't see what's going on there. So you can go log into your bank website or something. But then what always happens is there might be a little grumbling, but then a couple of days later they just forget about it. And our thing is it's as frictionless as it could possibly be. And say if we're generating some automation after a few months, then we in a very controlled environment we deploy it. And instead of automatically updating some internal system or master system of record, we call it an agent preview, and it allows the human to see what's going on, what's about to happen, or review, where they can review what just happened, and that allows them to get up that comfort curve, or to achieve that level of comfort with what we're doing, and that the results are good. And after a certain point, they're going to say, I don't need to keep reviewing this because it's as good or better than what a human did, and they move on to something higher value, more strategic, less tactical. So we definitely want to have it controlled before releasing. It's never really released into the wild. It's just we're taking these narrow approaches, and then they're adjacent, and eventually we can hook up the adjacent use cases, and then stuff gets freed up. These humans get freed up to do what humans do best, which is problem solve and communicate and be creative and all that stuff. So my suggestion would be, yes, it doesn't have to be a huge, difficult undertaking. It depends on your internal capability. Not everybody's got data scientists hanging around looking for something to do. So we're trying to actually address mid-size, small to medium-sized businesses that want to take advantage of AI but don't have the wherewithal internally.
Mm-hmm. So what other practical steps can a business leader take, for example, if they want to achieve a goal, achieve their mission, and how can AI facilitate that? And what are the steps?
This is Will again. One thing that I think is really valuable for a business leader is to know what your goal is. And I think this is a conversation with AI things that is sometimes not had enough. So your goal might be a new product, which is going to be a brand new product that is entirely reliant upon AI and maybe costs a lot of money to develop, but might be very high risk. Like Alexa by Jeff Adams, who is the lead engineer, he did not have full confidence that it was going to be nearly as big as it was. My Alexa just responded to me when I said that. The second is there could be a differentiating feature like text assist. Like whenever you text somebody, you get them the suggestions. Very simple, very subtle, but improves the product. And people don't even all the time acknowledge that it's an AI thing there. It's just kind of in the background. And three, it's like marketing publicity. So it's okay for a company to just say we're doing AI for purely marketing and publicity. And I think sometimes like that's kind of not seen as cool, but like IBM Watson on Jeopardy was one of the most successful marketing campaigns like ever, just for using AI. And originally it was just they weren't building a differentiating feature and they weren't building a product. So my advice is know what your goal is. Are you just trying to get some market publicity? Lean into that then, or like, are you just trying to get a differentiating feature to genuinely make your product better? Focus on that. And if you want to do a new product, realize that it's going to be high risk, high return. But the engineers will behave differently depending on what they know, if they know what that goal is, which is pretty important, I think.
Yeah, and I might respond here with more government speak, since I'm not going to be able to speak as well to sort of the business aspect of things, but at least in government, I mean, know your mission really well, know how you deliver that mission, know your pain points across that mission space, and then find the narrow use case where you can resolve challenges within those pain points. Also know sort of who's your customer. Is your customer internal to your agency? Is your customer the public? How you respond to that is going to be different. And take advantage of the both of those aspects, internal or public side. I mean, every place I've ever worked, there aren't necessarily data scientists everywhere, but there are analysts in almost every division, every office, every team. There are people who are either actually called analysts or they just inherently are analytical in their thinking. Take advantage of that. So you don't need to hire a million data scientists. Maybe you need to have a core team of data scientists to sort of facilitate sort of the broad thinking and almost like centers of excellence kind of style. But take advantage of those people who are already doing analytical thinking across the teams. There's a lot of opportunity that we don't always recognize. I mean, we're always talking about we're short of resources. We need to hire more. Well, actually, we probably have the people already, but can we find them? So make sure we have that sort of customer engagement strategy in place where we're engaging effectively, so we know how to take advantage of the resources that are there.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll pile on to that as well. That you got to know your goal. You got to know what the objective is. And I would say it's very important to have a very clear problem statement of what you want to have actually accomplished. And then if you're completely new to AI, then I would go out and I would talk to people and say, is this problem I have suitable to be solved with AI? Do you have and those people that are familiar with AI will give you some background and be able to say, you're going to need these few things to do that. Do you have those types of items, which is data, well-structured data, well-governed data, the people in-house, the adoption, the risk analysis, they'll walk through those things in 30-minute, hour conversation. You can get some of that insight. And then if you don't have the staff, there's groups around that can actually help augment and accelerate your entry into AI while you're figuring out how you're going to ramp up your internal staff as well. So that would be my advice. Know what problem you want to solve. Make sure, talk to some experts, see if it is a problem amenable to AI. And then there are groups that can actually help accelerate it.
And maybe I'll round us out with one last sort of comment here, and that is, subject matter experts, as I think, Kirsten, you've just sort of hit on, they're always going to be required. When we develop AI systems, whether it be for government entities or if you're in, the corporate commercial world or something in between, you're always going to need subject matter experts to really help you articulate what questions do we want to ask of our data, where do we have make money moments, save money moments. Like if you really break it down, sometimes that's also what it comes to, is just simplifying it for your leadership team and saying, hey, what if there was a way that we could do X or Y? Like keeping that creative vibe across your team is what's going to really help you find an AI use case where you can, start small, but think really, really big and have pretty quick impact on your business or your customer or your agency, your internal customer, that will then just start to help you, as I said, build the muscle, get comfortable with AI, start to bring in Tell your stories, celebrate your wins within your company, because the more you celebrate, it helps sort of demystify the threat that AI has on many people, that it's going to take over my job, or, I'm going to be, replaced by this or that. It really is about augmenting, us as humans. And the last thing I'll say that I like to work with customers on is helping you be really competitive in your market. And that even includes employee retention and hiring the best talent and keeping them excited to be at your company. And so these are ways that I think all of us on the panel, and certainly Agile Thought, is here to help. And I think that you don't have to do this. You're not on your own. Leverage those of us and many others in your community that, have a point of view and listen and be curious. And you'll be surprised how many people will come out of the woodwork wanting to help you.
Awesome. So in the last couple of minutes of our panel, just wanted to open it up for last remarks, comments, anything that you want to leave the conversation today with some quick, like one-liner, two-liner about, how can you best advise a business leader on their AI journey. So we're gonna go do a quick round. So Kirsten, we'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think I've said a lot of this already, but make sure you know your data architecture, you have governance in place, know what problem you're trying to solve. Don't do AI just because everyone's doing AI, but because there is a problem you're trying to solve and define that use case. And I've said it earlier, but make sure you have that AI governance framework in place so you have the right sort of checkpoints established to have the right discussions around ethics, around bias, around risks, so that you're really thinking about the whole picture of what you're trying to implement here.
Excellent. Will?
Mine's actually going to be more on like kind of the engineering side. Is like a lot of the times AI models can get overrun in complexity. And one thing is I think that's really important is to make sure that whenever a team is building one of these, is to keep it simple. Like just these don't have to be complicated as kind of they're always depicted. And these things can get huge monsters of complexity, which it's sometimes better to have something that's maybe less as like perfect as you might encounter in like an academia solution, but that instead have something that is that requires low amounts of code maintainability and will persist for a long period of time after it's been done once, and that other people in the future can easily pick up and understand what's going on. So documentation and good simple solutions when it comes to AI, I think are important.
Awesome. Jason?
It's a great, AI is a great opportunity for everybody. There's going to be a lot of growth in AI over the next 2 decades for certain, as we see a lot of evolution. We've hit on some of the things that are pertinent here today, which I'm not going to rehash, but I say pay attention to AI, pay attention to the use cases that are going on in the world today. And I would say within the next 5 years, we'll get a big Wall Street Journal front page kind of success story of AI in some aspect of the world. And so pay attention to that. It'll be a guideline or guidepost as to what's possible with AI.
Awesome. Joe?
Yeah, following on, it's I couldn't agree more. There was a Mark Andreessen, the Netscape guys, big VC. He wrote an article about how the internet is eating the world. That was some years ago, and now it's like AI, and if people do not, if companies, if leaders do not like move on it, then yeah, from a competitor's perspective, it's they will not exist in the near future. So yeah, my sort of parting thoughts, as someone said earlier, think big but start small, and I think it's important to actually iterate, like take an agile methodology towards AI, and don't try to get it right the first time. but instead get your minimum viable product, and don't aim for perfection. Get it out there. You're going to learn from it, and then just keep cycling, and you'll more likely to get there.
Awesome. And Priya, finally, for our closing remark.
Yeah, I'll add to what everyone has said by reminding everyone that, the technology, the tools, the frameworks, the pre-trained models, the machine learning services, the platform, the GPU, the CPU, all the compute, all that stuff is going to work, right? And it's going to continue to get better and better. So really focus your efforts as an organization or an entity, a team, on solving problems that are going to make a difference for you, for your customers, for your employees, for humanity, for the earth, for people, whatever it is that you're passionate about, or what your, as Kirsten said, your core mission is. And the technology will be there to support your innovation. And don't do it alone. We've got lots of people that can help you in the community of AI, and a lot of thought leaders, a lot of people that are ready to support you. And do so, as everyone said, with incredible vigilance around responsibility, and as much curiosity and transparency as you can, so that you can feel really comfortable with what you put out in production with your name and your logo on it as something that's substantial for you in the industry that you're in.
Awesome. So with that said, I want to say thank you to all of our panelists today. Those were a really, really insightful conversation for me personally, and I'm sure for a lot of our attendees. I want to thank our attendees also for participating in this panel, at least listening in. And hopefully you can have some of these three main takeaways, although we touched upon a lot of things. But hopefully you learn something today that will allow you to start your AI journey. So with that said, thank you very much, and we'll see you sometime soon. Thanks.
Thank you.